Hello and welcome to Media Monitor, the show that monitors and evaluates news and media in the country and internationally. My name is Peter Ndoro, and coming on the show today, the South African Broadcasting Corporation, the SABC. Well, the corporation has confirmed that it will embark on a process of retrenchment of workers in 2 months' time after consulting with labor unions. The group CEO, Madoda Mxakwe, says that the current wage bill is 50% of the revenues that the corporation is earning, and this is just not sustainable given the SABC's dire financial situation. What options are there then for the SABC to become financially stable? And whether you celebrate the 24th of September tomorrow as Heritage Day, Bride Day or Shaka Day, 22 years on, have we lost the meaning of our heritage, and what role can the media play in promoting heritage? But all of that's still to come. First though, let's take a look at what you're waking up to on the front pages of your newspapers. And we start with the Sunday Times, which leads with a story about former President Jacob Zuma's hush-hush trip to Qatar, that neither the presidency, the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, DIRCO, nor the South African Embassy in Doha were informed about, as the protocol dictates. The City Press, that's running with the headline story about cash-strapped SAA considering selling off assets after banks have refused to lend it any more money, and its debt ballooned to 15 billion rand more than its assets at the end of July. And this article further states that South African Airways is technically bankrupt and will therefore not present its 2017-2018 financials to Parliament by the end of this month, as required by law. The Sunday Independent is carrying a story about the scope of violence in South African classrooms, which has reached unprecedented levels, with scores of teachers complaining that they're being forced to teach pupils who are often high on drugs such as cannabis, dagga, tick or ecstasy. The Gauteng Department of Education said that it would deploy armed security at night and patrollers supported by surveillance cameras during the day at identified schools. The Sunday Tribune is running with a story about how a suspect arrested in connection with the murder of a woman and her 2 daughters in Phoenix was a friend of the mother. The 45-year-old suspect is facing 3 murder charges. The Weekend Argus is leading with a story about how armoured vans carrying legal shipments of farmed abalone are increasingly being ambushed by opportunistic poaching crime syndicates. And crossing our border into Swaziland, the Observer there is running with a story about the Mahlamba-Nyathi Inkundla election has not gone in favour of Minister Piwayinkosi Mabuza. Mabuza has also hinted that the elections in the area could have been rigged. And as we go to West Africa, Nigeria's Daily Trust is leading with a story about how early elections in Osun State show that competition is too close to call between the trio of Iskia Boyeja Oyetola of the All Progressive Congress, APC, Senator Ademola Adeleke of the People's Democratic Party, the PDP, and Senator Iyola Omisore of the Social Democratic Party. All right, so those are your newspapers, and we'll be taking a closer look at some of those stories a little bit later on in our newspaper review, so stand by for that. Alright, so lots to look forward to and quite a bit to discuss, and let's get straight into our first story, which is close to home for us here at the SABC. Well, the corporation has confirmed that it'll start a process of retrenching workers in 2 months' time after consulting with labor unions. The group CEO, Madoda Mxakwe, says that the current wage bill is eating up 50% of our revenues, which is just not sustainable given the SABC's current financial situation. The organization is in a dire predicament as a result of many years of governance failures, mismanagement mismanagement and poor decision making. Communications Minister Nomvula Mokonyane says that the SABC board has not followed due process, though, in informing Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Communications about its looming retrenchments.
Been working very well with the SABC to try and rescue the SABC in terms of finances, interacting, and hence even in our approach we said we need Treasury to be part of this, we need DOC to be part of this, we need the SABC. But what has been also quite good, there are other public broadcasters just here around the corner in Namibia that have also come forward to share the best practices, and for the SABC board to then take this kind of a view, I find it quite unfair and unfortunate, because they need to have an open and transparent approach on the repositioning of the SABC. I'm a representative of the shareholder, which is the South African public. We need to say what is the government's view. Thanks God the President also spoke about these issues to say, yes, the public purse in terms of the salary bill is beyond control. Yes, we need to look at these issues. There has to be engagement, and this must be the last resort rather than being the first step. And I think it's unfortunate that the SABC has done that.
Well, joining me now for a discussion is the Head of Policy Programme at Media Monitoring Africa, Tandy Smith. Tandy, it was a pleasure to have you. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we're also joined by the National Coordinator at the SOS Coalition Support to Public Broadcasting, Duduetsang Makuza. Thanks very much for joining us, and welcome to you.
Thanks for being here.
All right, let me start with you, because you want to save our public broadcaster. Your thoughts about, the situation that the broadcaster finds itself in, and I think that most people know how we got here, but the issue is now, how do we fix it? As people that are concerned about the public broadcaster, what are your thoughts about what's happening?
I think the big thing that is really at the fore of our position right now is making sure that people understand that it's not a simple problem, and therefore we can't simplify the solution. So as you've already mentioned, the process of us getting here is very well documented. And I think just for the purposes of this current discussion, I'll limit myself to the past 5 years. We need to be cognizant of the fact that because it's a multimodal problem, it's going to require multimodal solutions. So what has happened now in this current discussion is that people heard the word retrenchments and latched onto it and created an entire narrative that looks as if the only possible way out of this is to just get rid of people and destroy livelihoods, and it's not. There's so many other avenues that can be pursued, but they need to be done in a very nuanced and very holistic manner, so that you sort of use the one solution against the other to offset the biggest and most negative impact. Because at this point, we're beyond crisis point. So that's the kind of approach that we would prefer people to start considering when we're having these discussions. Yeah, I think that's pretty much just a snapshot.
All right, I'm going to come back to you just now to get a sense of what other options there might be, because if I'm sitting as Group CEO and I look at this balance sheet, I don't know where to start. Tandy, this is also a story you've been watching unfold for some time now. When you heard about the retrenchments and the things that could be done, what thoughts came to your mind immediately?
You know, obviously no one wants to hear the word retrenchment. Not in an ordinary company, not in a SOE. It's just, it is the absolutely last solution to some, or one of the solutions, as Duduetsang was touching on. But I think it's clear to make it's important to make the point that this isn't the first option that the board has gone with. You saw the board, you saw the interim board coming in last year, doing massive amounts of work. Then you saw the board become a permanent board, continuing to do huge amounts of positive work. Yes, there have been a few issues along the line. Yes, there have been, disagreements and some controversies, which is normal given the crisis that we're in with the SABC. But by no means is this, the first sort of port of call for solutions. And I think we need to acknowledge that. And, it looks as if the board is going ahead with a proper process by saying we're going to be engaging with unions. We're going to be following proper labour procedures, and we just hope that that is the case, you know, that it is the last solution and not the first.
Okay, Dudwetsang, you're the CEO now. You're sitting in the office. I've given you this job, and I've given you a year. What do you do then? Because when we hear that Cabinet has got so many ministries and that President Ramaphosa is going to cut them down, everybody claps. And yet when it comes to actual SOEs, we want to look at it differently. Is that fair?
It's not fair, because in all honesty, in as much as the SABC is, you know, a national treasure and a public institution, it really does have a commercial imperative to satisfy. The very livelihoods that you're trying to protect will not be protected if it's insolvent. So what do? You literally do what has already been done, what basically we started doing a year ago, which is take a good look at what's happening. You know, do a whole, what's happening in terms of legislation and regulation, what's happening in its finances, what's happening in terms of the actual product and the content, what's happening in terms of your capacity, both human and otherwise. Are there any assets that are sitting not being used, or are there assets that are being misused? Are there people that you've placed in the wrong positions or in the wrong places? Do you need to reshuffle things around? So before you even consider pulling in a consulting firm, a private partner, or anything like that, you do the work inside and you look at what the elements are, and then you make a decision.
Is it possible that the SABC is overstaffed and we've just been employing people over time, and with that we're actually not productive because there's too many people, Thandi? And if that's the case, surely you've got to get rid of some people.
I mean, you have to look at internal staffing. But I think what's also being missed with this issue is that no one's talking about the hugely inflated salaries that we saw coming out of management over the last couple of years. No one's talking about those, you know, the senior management HR problems. No one's talking about, you know, where that money is going as well. So I don't think it's a case of, are we overstaffed? You know, I don't know if that is the solution, if that is the answer. I think that, you know, the process of going through where the salary inflation has taken place, because we've had proof that it's there. You know, I think that's also a key area to address.
So the private sector sheds jobs all the time. Are we saying that the public sector is not allowed to do that?
Well, that's precisely the problem, isn't it? We're wanting to protect them because we're thinking, well, public institution. But the reality is you do have to shed jobs at some point. You do have to become a fit for purpose in terms of size, in terms of scope, in terms of mandate. You know, maybe you want to review this mandate and narrow it down so that we can actually get the job done. I don't think that public or SOEs are immune to this. That's the reality of being an enterprise and having to deal commercially, is that you kind of have to consider the fact that if you don't practice certain, if you don't maintain certain financial controls, certain levels of governance, in the long run, within your five-year business cycle, you will run into problems. The wrong decision could have been made at the beginning, and the chickens will come to roost in the 5th year. And I think that's what we're seeing happening now. And that's why when Thandi is talking about the impact of having inflated salary increases, and there were so many stories around how freelancers were becoming permanent and people were being paid performance bonuses. Those things, I would start there. I wouldn't really start and use an accounting principle of last in, first out. No. I would start at what happened in the last 5-year period to bring up the salary bill. And after we've reduced that, we can start considering, okay, do we have a duplication of roles and so on and so forth.
So here's one interesting figure that intrigued me in the financial statements, and it's to do with television licenses. Now, the accountants write off certain amounts. There's an impairment on that because they can see that it's not going to be paid. So that gets written off, almost like a bad debt. Now, the amount that was written off in the last year's financial statements, not these ones, would have turned the company into a profit had those licensees' fees been paid. So the question now I'm wondering is, are we being e-told? What is this culture that people are just refusing to pay their TV licenses? Because had everyone paid their TV licenses, we would actually be in a profit. What is that saying?
I mean, I think that points to a couple of issues. And we've had the problem of non-payment on TV licenses for a couple of years now. And also, you know, I think that the money coming in from TV licenses is a very small amount compared to the bigger various other funding models that you're looking at. But for me, the issue of content is a big aspect of the TV license issue. And not only content, but choice. You know, you have to look at, well, who's watching SABC and who's paying for TV licenses and who's opting to go with DSTV. So I think the content is an issue. Choice of platforms and content is an issue. But that's not only an internal SABC thing. That's an entire environment issue. It's a regulatory issue. It's a, you know, SABC being 10 years late on their policy review, editorial policy review issue. So I think that there are a lot of issues that deal with the TV licenses, but it's not the solution to getting SABC out of the funding crisis that we're in.
But it's such a huge contribution. How do we get people to do the right thing and pay their TV licenses?
It is a massive contribution, and I think in as much as, you know, there's all these other reasons why maybe there might be a lack of faith on the part of the public. They've just decided, you know what, we're done here. We've watched this crisis unfold, and we're just not going to pay licenses anymore. But I think the reverse could be said, in the sense that if we want a public broadcaster and we want to have this place that we say, you know, is the media platform where we're all represented and we want to see the fulfillment of this mandate, then unfortunately there's a degree of citizen responsibility that comes into play. There's a degree of ownership. You need to have a sense of ownership about this. Otherwise, this is what's going to happen. And perhaps had everybody paid their licenses, and maybe because it's just like 1.8 or 18% of the revenues, maybe we wouldn't be considering retrenchments. Maybe we would just be making it with reserves, you know? So, all
right. Unfortunately, we always run out of time with these issues. Makuza, thanks very much for joining us. Welcome. And to you, Tandy, we're going to speak to you again a little bit later on, so don't run away. Yeah, and you at home, pay your TV licenses. It's the right thing to do. We'll see you after this.
Where am I going to sleep now? What about my kids?
There is bribe involved because we're not aware that they will come today.
People are being evicted about 2 months ago in May. We served the first court order. This is private property.
They came to us with a truck that has no water.
How do we build these checks in a way that we don't have a fire spread when we have a fire incident?
More than 100 heads of state and government are expected in New York for the high-level segment of the 73rd session of the United Nations General Assembly. The largest gathering of presidents and prime ministers anywhere on the planet. Some familiar faces won't be returning for the first time in decades. Others will be making their debut at the prestigious gathering, while thousands of news media from around the world will be spoilt for choice.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself.
High-level meetings include the one-day Nelson Mandela Peace Summit on September 24th, including a donation of a life-sized Madiba statue to the UN. The general debate starts on September 25th, while side events include a focus on eradicating tuberculosis, controlling non-communicable diseases, non-proliferation, and financing for the 2030 agenda.
The world is counting on all of us to rise to the challenge before it is too late.
The SABC Foreign Desk will bring you comprehensive coverage of UNGA 73. SABC News, impartial and independent.
Now, welcome back. Now, 24th of September is Heritage Day in South Africa, a day where people across the country are encouraged to celebrate their cultures and their diversity of beliefs and traditions in true Rainbow Nation style. Now, celebrations happen much of the time through music, through language, and even the foods that we get to eat. In 2007, one man started an initiative wanting to unite all South Africans around fires, sharing our heritage and waving the flag. And he wanted to call it National Braai Day. But some analysts say that this demonstrated cultural appropriation and a lack of understanding of the meaning of heritage. So it's a day that means different things to different people, especially our children, as we found out.
It is important to celebrate our heritage because we learn about different cultures and we eat different foods and we wear different clothes. So it is important to me so I can learn about our religions and cultures.
Heritage Day is important because we can stand a chance to go see your late grandfathers and mothers and stand a chance to eat more traditional food that we've never eaten before.
Heritage Day is about where we celebrate our cultural things. We wear different clothes and we eat different food. We celebrate different things, different times of the year.
I like Heritage Day because it maintains our cultures and you can wear your traditional clothes.
I think we should celebrate Heritage Day because it teaches us about lots of different things. It teaches us about different clothes, different foods, and it brings us all together.
Happy very, very nice. Now, to discuss the media's role as well in promoting heritage, we're now joined by the head of marketing and communications at the National Heritage Council, Danny Gulkan. Thanks very much for joining us and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Peter, and thank you very much for having me.
And also someone who's not unfamiliar to television is an analyst on land, gender, politics and culture, Professor Nomboniso Gasa. Thanks very much for joining us, Prof.
Oh, thank you for having me and
good
evening to the viewers.
Right, okay, so Heritage Day. We're wearing our number ones for Heritage Day. And I'm going to start with you, Danny. Why one day? Surely it's something that we should just live and experience throughout the year, just by being.
True, Peter, and the 24th of September should not be taken as the only day that we expect South Africans to celebrate their heritage and culture. It is just a day as a reminder for us as a nation to celebrate our diversity and the richness of our culture. But in fact, we live our heritage and culture on a daily basis. On a daily basis in our workspaces, in social settings, in our families. We've got various ways of expressing and living our heritage and cultures. It's just that once we use the day of the 24th to inspire the public, to use it as a symbolic appreciation of what is happening throughout the year, is now then taken as if it's only done once a year. No, we live it throughout.
All right. Prof, I know for certain on Monday when I'm driving down Jan Smuts and I look left at Zoo Lake,
yes.
I'm going to see lots of braais there. And there's this thing that we shouldn't call it Braai Day, we should just call it Heritage Day. Is this an appropriation of Heritage Day, or is it just another way of celebrating it?
Well, I mean, I think that it's probably, for some people, it's another way of celebrating what we consider as, you know, some of the practices that bring South Africans together, and braaiing is one of those. But I think that there's something jarring about National Braai Day, because whether we like it or not, braai, the culture of braai, is associated with very specific communities in South Africa, in particular white, heterosexual male cultural idiom. And of course, all South Africans braai. But I think that it's okay for people to get together to have a braai, but to actually take a day and call it that, for me, it is problematic because you have a whole lot of other people. You have people who are vegetarians, you have religions and cultural practices, in fact, that do not share in the eating of flesh. So I think that more than appropriation, to some extent, for some people, it is also a way of avoiding the notion of cultural heritage that is multiple. So it's almost like you push your own cultural idiom, what you find comfortable with you, and make sure that it becomes, part of the dominant narrative. And I think it's undesirable, And again, it's not about the braai. It is about where people think the braai fits in the national consciousness and cultural practices.
Danny, the media, are we helping the cause about celebrating heritage, or are we not doing enough?
Look, over the years, since the dawn of our democracy, we must commend certain good efforts that we have observed in certain media houses. And there has been quite a tremendous transformation in expressing or reporting or broadcasting about the celebration of heritage. Remember, this should not only be a role of media on the 24th. So when we look broader, I would say that we have barely scratched the surface, considering the sporadic efforts that are evident at the moment. Peter, as a communicator myself, and also being passionate about heritage and culture, this is the observation that we made as the National Heritage Council as well, and we tried to make a contribution, which I'll come to later, that unlike other major disciplines that drive media, your politics, economics, arts, we have not over the years seen a dedicated effort in the media to have reporters specifically dedicated to culture and heritage. And because it is not a once-off activity, we see an opportunity for the media to leverage on that how do you reach out to your viewers? How do you reach out to more readers? Actually, we see this as an opportunity to establish or explore the correlation between growing audiences, growing readership, by reporting more on culture, because that is what resonates much more deeper with South Africans.
All right, it's interesting. As you were talking, I could hear people our generation resonating with this, and I'm just thinking, young people, is this what they really want to listen and watch? And I just wonder, when you wake up tomorrow morning, switch on your TVs, pick up newspapers, what do you want to see more of in the media?
Well, I mean, I think firstly, just a quick one on young people. I think that there is a generation of South Africans actually that are taking issues on cultural pluralism and cultural heritage of different kinds, especially African cultural heritages, who are in fact being very much out there and who are leading the debate. So a lot of young people are in fact being drawn into conversations, sometimes which they lead on the multiple cultural heritage in this country. I think also that tomorrow I would like, because if we agree that culture is not a one-day off thing, heritage is not a one-day off thing, but that the day is for focusing and saying, we are people of different cultural heritage, we are a multiple cultural kind of society. So what would be nice, what I would like to see tomorrow would be sometimes maybe to open a newspaper and see the headline in an African language. See the headline in Chivenda, Chitonga, and all of that, because there's nothing that is going to happen. So I think that in a way we are not allowing ourselves to be daring and to be exploring as a society. We are very cautious. And of course, media reflects society. So whatever you find in the media, don't find in the media. It in fact, in many cases, in most instances, reflects our own prejudices, our own bias, and our own consciousness and interest. But I also think that media can drive, and often does, does in fact drive conversations about what it is that we would like to see. So it'll be quite interesting to see media that is daring and have conversations about cultural practices and celebration of culture beyond the spectacle. You know, we know tomorrow wherever people are gathering, whether it's government and others, that we are going to be treated to the spectacle of dresses, to the spectacle of dances, and you know, and all these things. And these are important, but I think that we need much more imagination.
All right, so we're doing enough. She mentioned language as one thing, and I think I saw a statistic the other day that just over 10% of people in South Africa actually speak English as a home language, so that there's so many more languages out there. And yet, kind of wherever you go, English is what's in our faces much more. Should we be trying through Heritage Day and throughout the year, trying to push the other languages more?
Yes, we should. Most definitely. I think as a diverse country, we cannot strive for unilingualism. We should be multilingual. And people expect, we have high expectations that our languages, indigenous languages, should be spoken, used for commercial purposes and in all spaces. And at times we tend to sort of forget the impact that our languages have suffered over the 300 years of colonization and oppression. And what it has done to the languages is to suppress that development to an extent that these languages can be equally applied as, for example, English in other disciplines. What is comforting, though, Peter, is that African languages over the years have found space in universities to be taught and to be used, especially in other spheres.
Okay, you know what? We could talk forever on this. Unfortunately, we've run out of time on this particular subject. Prof. Nombonisa, we're going to carry on with you. But to Danny, asante sana, tatende uskuru, maita bahasa. What else can we say? Karibuha. Exactly. There you go. Thanks so much indeed
and
for your
enjoy your
contribution.
Heritage Day on the 24th.
And the same to you.
And what we appeal to South Africans is that the preservation of our heritage lies in the family unit. We as families need to start to take the responsibility to teach younger people our culture and not defer the responsibility to teachers and the external public.
Great.
It needs to start at home.
Thank you so much indeed. Thank you. All right, we're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we continue with taking a look at things like the newspapers and what's been happening in the digital world.
Amakhazi asibulele since kusile la Fatimbawula la kuyabanda le goli, and then sesize sadecide ukuthi sivele sibase umlilo khona sokhona nokufudumala kusebenzeki na kahle.
Police killers are not coming from the sky. They are actually coming from the communities where we are. So it cannot be correct.
We regret what has happened because the strike affects everyone. So is electricity. Electricity also affects everyone. It's a community problem.
We are owning ESCOM. Currently, we could not reconcile the bill, what they bill us, with theirs. We could not agree.
Welcome to this week's social media wrap. Let's look at the major trends for this week.
The nation celebrated this week with the unexpected win by the Springboks against the All Blacks, and this sent social media
into a frenzy. This was shortly followed by Dagga being legalized, which put social media on a high. Dagga is the biggest story this week, and it is over half of the top 10 stories with 52% of the coverage, followed by the Springboks. Thereafter, we're dealing with the state capture inquiry, comes in as the third largest story, with Zondo making headlines by refusing the Guptas and others to cross-examine witnesses. There's always a racism story at least once a month, and as tired as we get of them, this particular story is simply bizarre. Casey Nair took to Facebook and called the president the K-word and stated flatly that he doesn't care to go to jail to do so. He was arrested, and yesterday he refused bail and asked to be sent directly to prison. Many cited that he sounds mentally unwell, but this story smacks of suspicion to me. It doesn't make any sense, so I'm sure more will come out of the woodwork as we go on. Recession is still on the charts, as it should be, but it's a fade-in story, and Cosatu and the new female leader made an impact on social media, while others debated Cosatu's relevance in this day and age. It's been a busy week, but it's not been a week that has been filled like previous weeks with hard-hitting politics. The DA has had a lot of noise this week between Athol Trollip and the new Western Cape Premier and the Mayor of Cape Town, but none of those stories made the top 10, leaving little impact on those stories across the nation.
Top stories on the SABC News website liked by users. The shooting that took place in Parliament has left many parliamentary staff traumatized, and concerns have been raised about the security level in Parliament. The Constitutional Court has found that the ban on the private use and the cultivation of dagga is unconstitutional. Also, KwaZulu-Natal police have found a 4-year-old girl who was abducted when her father's vehicle in Pinetown, west of Durban, was hijacked on Saturday. And finally, Finance Minister Nhlanhla says government is considering incentive for workers who want to exit the public sector early. This article has been trending on the SABC News website since last week. That's it for your social media rep. For SABC News in Johannesburg, I'm Tsepi so much.
SABC is independent and impartial, and it's important that as we deliver the news, we do so without fear, without favour, without prejudice, and that we ensure that we get the multiplicity of views so that our stories and coverage is balanced.
We pride ourselves on being impartial as well as independent. On the agenda, we basically break down the stories of the day, give it more substance and give it more detail. So all in all, we basically take the news agenda of the day forward.
But more than that, we'll be able to reflect the stories of ordinary folk, people who are trying to make ends meet, facing the most incredibly difficult obstacles and circumstances, and that they will find that their realities are expressed on the SABC.
To be a part of something like this makes me proud, and I think that to be able to report the news in a fair, just, independent and impartial way is what the public broadcaster stands for.
Right, welcome back. Let's start taking a look at our newspapers now with my guests, Tandy Smith and Professor Nomboniso Gasa. And before that, though, yesterday President Cyril Ramaphosa announced the Minister of Environmental Affairs, Ma'am Edna Molewa, passed away. She died in a Pretoria hospital after a period of illness. Minister Molewa was a political activist, and before being appointed to her current position, she was Minister of Social Development and the first female Premier of the Northwest Province. And I just want to get your reactions to this. And what I've been seeing, and as I hear the tributes and as I read about her story, what comes to the fore is that a lot of people recognized her as one of the hardest working cabinet ministers and contributed immensely to South Africa. Let me start with you, Prof.
Well, I mean, I think it's very sad. In my book, Edna was very young. 61 in this day and age is actually very young. It's young. So I think it's a very sad passing. I think that both as a Premier of Northwest, and as a minister on national environment, on environmental affairs, she held very critical positions in this society. And environment is very important, but it is one of those things that we do not think about, and we do not appreciate the kind of work that goes into that portfolio until something doesn't work. So it would be, I think it would be very important for South Africans actually to have a conversation around environmental affairs, particularly in this time of climate change, and we're seeing a lot of things. Even today's weather, actually outside, it's an indication of something is not quite there. So I hope that part of the tribute to her is going to be putting in place a minister who is going to be able to carry that work and also take it even further than she did.
She was getting praise from both sides of the floor, all the political parties. And often that's, not a lot of politicians get that genuine praise from opposition members.
Yeah, I also want to agree with the issue that, environmental subjects or the topic of environmental issues is not covered enough by our media, and we don't get enough of a decent analysis about what's going on and how it affects our everyday life. And yeah, I'd also love to see, as a tribute or going forward, we get far more comprehensive coverage and maybe some good analysis on what's going on and education around what's going on in the environment. But it's very sad, and it's never a good thing.
All right. Well, so rightfully so, a lot of the papers on the front pages will be looking at her. But let's start with you, Prof. And what other stories grabbed your attention in the newspapers this weekend?
Well, I have to say it has to be one of the stories. It's the story that is or should be in the minds of all South Africans. This are we now going to have every Sunday? Are we now going to have stories breaking about what President Zuma is doing?
Okay, so this is on the front page of the Sunday Times.
Yes, on the front page. What is he up to? And I think that also I'm very alarmed and uncomfortable with what seems to be an extension of intra-party factions and interests to interstate across the border. It's very worrisome. It's going to be very interesting to see what President Zuma is going to say he was doing in Doha, and I don't want to prejudge anything, but I think that there's something deeply uncomfortable about having these stories about secret meetings that he has, secret trip that he has taken, and are these in the interest of the country, or is it because he feels embattled? And if it's because of that, how far is he willing to go?
Any thoughts on this Sunday Times headline story? The president, sneaking off and sort of breaking all protocols. What do you think is he trying to say?
Well, there's definitely been a lot of mystery around actions and things going on with former President Zuma in the last couple of weeks, and it would be nice to get some clarity on some issues. I know that it's tiresome seeing yet again more headlines and more stories coming out, but in the lead up to elections, I think that it's critical that there's more transparency about things that might not be that in the public interest at the moment.
Right.
No, what else? Like Tandy, I'm not. My issue is not whether the newspaper is reporting. I think it's good for the newspaper reporting it, but I think that the question is, what is President Zuma up to?
Yes. $1 million question.
Yeah.
All right. What else grabbed your attention? I see that you got the Sunday Independent in front of you.
The Sunday Independent, and it's refreshing that it's not a political story on the front page of a Sunday paper. We're looking at something else: pupils' reign of terror at schools, which is not a very positive story either. And we're looking at you touched on it in the introduction to the show earlier. We're touching on the violence and the increasing violence in schools. But what I find disappointing about the story is that it's a very top-down approach to covering the issue. It looks at at administrative issues at the school, and it looks at from a teacher's perspective. We're not unpacking what's going on from a youth or a child perspective. You know, you're talking about children who, or pupils who are clearly dealing with massive societal pressures and dealing with violence and are acting out in certain ways, and we're not speaking to them. I mean, a little quote here. It says, the plight of teachers and their dangerous working conditions came to the fore this week following the fatal stabbing of a 24-year-old Northwest teacher by a 17-year-old pupil, alleged that the teacher denied him a second plate of food a few days prior to the incident. I mean, those are the issues we're dealing with, and so obviously it's a big, it can go on, and there's a whole lot of analysis you can do, but yeah, at a first glance, big missed opportunity without going from a sort of a youth perspective. But also they talk about the drug use, dacha use, and having to deal with that kind of thing in school grounds, which brings me to the other story that I just want to touch, and it's the cannabis ruling by the Constitutional Court. And a great story on page 4 saying, police confused by cannabis ruling. I mean, this is a problem that we need to deal with. We can't have confusion around this kind of ruling. It's clearly a problem, or we have people abusing the drug. We have it being affected at a school level, and with police being confused about what's going on. We need clarity about what this actually means.
But I think that touches on some of the problems around the criminal justice system. You would think that there's clarity on when there's been a constitutional ruling, right, that it doesn't just go out there and says, okay, that has changed, it's illegal now. What was happening was that there was a need to seek constitutional clarity on this. So the next step really is actually Parliament coming up with legislation, right? So in terms of the reality, nothing has changed yet. So the police ought to do how they were treating dacha before. You know, what the constitutional ruling is saying is that, look, it is unconstitutional to continue using looking at dacha as as illegal. So that's what it is, and then also it sets out parameters of how this should be happening. So you can smoke in your house, you can do that, but you actually need legislation to give effect, to give it effect. So I think that the fact that the police, especially, being so critical in the criminal justice system, that they are so confused is an indication of something else that is happening.
And I suppose it's our job as the media to clear these things up, isn't it, for our readers and our viewers. And also that the Constitutional Court only deals with a specific question, not a wide range of issues. And so whilst you can smoke weed at home, you can't go outside and buy it. And you can't sell it. So the only way is actually to grow your own. If you're not growing your own, you're going to break the law in acquiring it. So it's going to be a difficult thing to navigate, and as you say, the lawmakers are going to have to come up with an answer to that one. All right, okay, so what we're going to do is, are we going to carry on, take a look at what's coming up in the week ahead? Let's ask you guys what you think is going to be a story that we're going to be following. I suspect the Doha trip is going to be one of them. What else do you think might capture our imagination this week ahead? Edna Molewa, certainly.
I think that the economic, the package that the president is putting up and what it actually means, I think that is definitely going to be something that we should be looking at. I think we need a serious conversation in this country on the economic situation. You know, fuel is going to go up again, whether it is said or not. The money that has been lost through state capture and corruption has got to be recouped one way or the other. So I think that's a conversation as well. But I think that also what President Ramaphosa said, that he's not really preoccupied by votes, he's preoccupied by jobs. Well, I mean, politician is always preoccupied by votes, you know. But I think it was quite a refreshing take on the current thing. So I think going forward in this week, there might be some conversation on what that means, and certainly the tensions in DA. I think DA House is very troubled. It's also going to be interesting to see what happens after this weekend.
All right. And Thandi, talking about President Ramaphosa's speech, do you think that we did a good enough job? I mean, he mentioned words like stimulus package, reprioritization. Do we as citizens understand what all of that means? Or is it just fancy words for actually simple tasks?
I was actually quite impressed with how the media started unpacking and explaining the plan when the President made the speech. But I do think it's surprising that we haven't seen it in our Sunday papers. I think that there could be a bit more explanation and a bit more relating to everyday. I mean, we're speaking about data costs being low. That's a big thing for South Africans. And how is what President Ramaphosa is saying in the plan, how long is it going to be? How long is it going to take to be implemented? Is it going to affect daily lives? So I think we can see, but it would be nice to see a bit more unpacking of the issues. So I think we're doing a good job, but we can do a little bit better.
So one story, I'm curious to get your take, both as women and as people who observe things. Zingizwalozi became the first woman president of COSATU. Now, that story was told differently by different media houses. One media house said that new president is Zingizwalozi, and then another one said the first woman president. What's your take on this? Should we be pushing the fact that she's the first woman, or should we just say that she's the president is Zingizwalozi, who happens to be a woman?
Well, it's definitely, it is a story. It is a story that COSATU is electing its first woman president, or its first president who is a woman in 2018. That in itself is a conversation about how patriarchy has been dominant, has actually been the foil of COSATU. And I think that we should be pushing the fact that she is a woman president. She is a woman, and she's president of the biggest federation in this country.
Yeah.
So I think it's brilliant that COSATU has elected her. I think it's saying a lot about the nature of our politics and how that's changing. And I think there's a very fine balance between pushing the fact that she is a woman in the coverage and not slipping into the common trend of focusing on typical female attributes of women, as we do with a lot of political leaders, or female or women political leaders. You tend to, the coverage tends to change with very slight approaches. So as long as we are focusing on the role, focusing on the politics, focusing on the position, I think it's a good thing to push the fact that we have a leader who's a woman.
Okay.
No, I think that the fact that she's a woman is an important story, and it's an important commentary on COSATU.
I'm fascinated by this take. So in 10 seconds each, because I've got to talk about this. Cyril Ramaphosa appears at the United Nations General Assembly for the first time. Do you think South Africa will be seen differently because it's him, or what are your thoughts? Very quickly, 10 seconds each. Start with you, Prof.
Well, he's definitely not going to miss meetings. That's one thing. So, and he's going to arrive on time. So that's very important because how people receive you is also about how you present yourself. So I think that's very important. And I think that he might be received differently, much more positively and taken seriously, of course, depending on the content that he brings. Right. But I'm quite comfortable just with the fact that he is going to show up, and he's going to show up on time.
10 seconds.
Yeah, I think that there's a very different feel and a very different reputation preceding the president now. I think that there is a lot of negative attributes previously, but we're going to have to wait and see.
All right, ladies, thank you very, very much indeed for your insightful thoughts, and it was a pleasure having you both.
Thank you.
And you at home, thanks so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you next week at the same time on this program, Media Monitor, and enjoy Heritage Day in between. Pay your TV licenses. Asomblief. Bye-bye.
Thank you.